I grew up in a narrow brick house on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio, a house that always felt tired but familiar. The porch sagged slightly, the paint curled on the railings, and the old heater in the hallway rattled so loudly it was almost part of the family. When I think of that house, I remember the faded yellow curtains in the kitchen and the scent of floor cleaner that always clung to the air. It was not a perfect place, but it was the center of my childhood, the place where I learned early that my role in the family was different from everyone else's. Inside those walls, my older brother Daniel was the champion. He got the loud cheers, the framed certificates, and the front seat in every family picture. My younger sister Chloe was treated like a delicate treasure. She was the baby who got extra blankets, extra care, and extra forgiveness. My parents, Linda and Mark, somehow always found ways to praise one of them or protect the other. And me? I was the helper. The one who filled in the cracks. The one who quietly kept the house running while everyone else moved through life like guests in a hotel. By the time I was 12, I was waking up early to pack lunches for school. I folded laundry while watching the clock, so I would not be late for my own homework. Daniel often forgot his soccer uniform, so I carried it to the field after school, walking fast so his coach would not bench him. Chloe needed help with every project, so I stayed up at the kitchen table cutting cardboard and gluing pieces together while my parents watched television in the living room. No one told me to do these things. They simply happened, like chores built into my bones. My mother liked to smile at me and say, "You are so dependable." It sounded sweet when I was young, but as I grew older, I began to understand what she really meant. Dependable was another word for invisible. Dependable meant I did not make trouble. Dependable meant they assumed I would always manage alone, even when I was struggling. The pattern stayed the same through all my teenage years. When the house needed something, I was called. When the family needed something, I was expected to step in. Yet on the days when praise filled the room, or when someone needed attention or comfort, my name was never mentioned. I watched Daniel's soccer trophies take over the living room shelf. I watched Chloe's artwork fill the hallway wall. The space where something of mine should have hung stayed blank. By the time I reached my senior year of high school, I had made a private promise to myself. If they would not see me in the house, they would see me through my work. I became serious about studying. I spent hours at the chipped kitchen table, solving problems and writing essays while my siblings played games in their rooms. If a parent-teacher meeting was forgotten, I signed my own slip and brought it back the next day. I refused to let their neglect shrink my future. When my acceptance letter arrived from a college in Boston, Massachusetts, I held it in both hands and felt something like electricity run through me. I had earned a scholarship and secured a part-time job on campus, which meant the dream was possible. My parents congratulated me, but I could see their reaction lacked the warmth they had shown when Daniel got hired at a local bank. My father even said, "He is staying close to home. That is what families do." The message beneath those words felt sharp. Still, I packed my bags and left for Boston. I wanted a new life, even if no one cheered me on. For years later, I stood in the bright graduation hall wearing a gown that smelled like warm fabric and nerves. The room was filled with families holding flowers, balloons, and signs covered in glitter. My classmates had parents waving wildly, as if they were welcoming returning heroes. The university had placed 8 chairs in a neat row with my family name printed in bold letters. All 8 were empty. I scanned the hall again and again, telling myself they might just be late. Maybe their flight from Cleveland had been delayed. Maybe someone got sick. Maybe the highway was blocked. It was easier to believe in bad luck than to accept the truth I had grown up with. If they did not need something from me, they did not show up. When the ceremony began, and my name was called, I walked across the stage alone. A small burst of applause filled the room from strangers, but the silence from my row felt louder than anything else. I kept my smile steady, but my heart felt heavy, like a stone that refused to move. After the ceremony ended, the hall filled with cheers and camera flashes. Parents wrapped their children in warm hugs. Some cried openly. A classmate's mom even kissed their forehead and whispered something that made them laugh. I stepped outside into the Boston air and took out my phone. I propped it on a bench, set the timer, and took my own graduation photo. In the picture, I am smiling. You might think I look proud. But behind the small curve of my lips, there is something else. The quiet acceptance that some people will never clap for you, no matter what you achieve. That night, in my tiny room in the apartment I shared with 3 roommates, I sat on my unmade bed and held my diploma. I traced my name printed in clean black letters. I reminded myself that this piece of paper was not a gift from them. It was the result of every late night, every lonely morning, and every sacrifice I made when no one cared enough to notice. This is the beginning, I whispered to myself. This is the start of learning how to stand without anyone's applause. I did not know it then, but that moment was the exact point where my life separated into 2 chapters. The girl who kept trying to earn a seat in her own family ended up on that stage. The woman I would become took her first breath the moment I made peace with the empty chairs. When I left Boston and stepped into my new life in Chicago, it felt like moving into a world made of concrete and cold wind. My first apartment sat in a worn neighborhood near the river, in a building that looked like it had given up on trying to impress anyone. The elevator creaked every time the doors shut. The hallways smelled like old paint. My room was small, with a single window facing an alley where stray cats slept on broken crates. Still, when I turned the key on that first night, I felt something new. No one expected me to wipe any counters but my own. No one rushed into my room asking for help. The space was mine, even if the walls were thin and the heat clicked loudly through old pipes. I took a job at a mid-level real estate firm downtown. It was not glamorous, and my salary barely covered rent and groceries, but it was honest work. The firm specialized in overlooked buildings, the kind people walked past without seeing. That spoke to me in a way I had not expected. Every morning, I walked through the lobby with my coffee, past the tall glass windows that looked out at the traffic below, and felt ready to learn something new. My coworkers talked about big opportunities, expensive dinners, and fancy trips. I listened quietly and kept my focus on the maps, the files, and the hidden potential in forgotten places. In the early months, my supervisors barely noticed me, which was almost comforting. I had spent years being invisible in my own home. Being unseen in a busy company felt easier. I worked through stacks of property records, studied zoning rules, and read everything I could get my hands on. While others rushed out at 5 to meet friends or find some loud place to unwind, I stayed behind and highlighted old survey notes. I discovered patterns in the way cities grew and shrank. I began to understand why some neighborhoods took off and others cracked under pressure. It was like reading the emotional map of a place, seeing where hope lived and where it had been forgotten. My phone rang every few weeks with calls from home, always short and always centered around someone else. My mother updated me on Daniel's promotions at the bank and the little surprises Chloe received from friends at college. Sometimes she paused long enough to ask if I was still in Chicago, as if she expected me to admit that the big city had spit me out. When I said yes, she would make a sound that hovered between disbelief and mild disappointment. Then she moved on to something about the weather. I pretended it did not bother me. I told myself I had grown used to being an afterthought. Years moved quietly. I saved every dollar I could, living on simple meals and walking instead of using ride shares. When my friends booked vacations to Florida or Europe, I said I had work. I sat in my apartment with a blanket around my shoulders and read financial documents until the streetlights blurred through the window. If loneliness crept in, I forced myself to look at my growing savings account and reminded myself that I was building something, even if I did not know what it would become yet. After 5 years at the firm, I finally made a decision. There was a warehouse that my team had reviewed many times. A long, neglected building on the edge of a river near my hometown in Ohio. It had been empty for more than a decade, its roof leaking and its windows boarded with warped wood. But every time I looked at the file, something tugged at me. Maybe because it reminded me of myself. A structure full of space and potential, but ignored by everyone who thought they already understood its worth. I ran the numbers quietly. I stayed late at the office for weeks, studying loan options, renovation costs, and possible returns. With enough of my savings and a careful loan, I could reach the asking price. It was risky, but I felt ready for the first time in my life to take a risk for myself, not for someone else. I created a small holding company and named it Harborline Properties. The name felt like a place where something could arrive safely and finally be seen. I made the offer, waited through tense weeks, and finally received a simple email confirming acceptance. I cried alone in my apartment that night. Not because of the money, but because I had done something with no one's permission but my own. The first time I walked through the warehouse as its owner, the sky was gray and rain slipped through the broken roof like thin silver threads. The air smelled like rust and old dust. The floor was cracked. Windows were missing, but I could see it in my mind. I imagined offices with sunlight spilling through new glass. A shared workspace where young people could build dreams of their own. A cafe overlooking the river, filled with warm lights reflecting on the water. I saw life in the place long before anyone else believed it. Renovation costs were high, nearly $8 million, but I found investors from America and Europe who believed in my plan. They trusted my eye for forgotten spaces. I worked days at my firm and nights on my project. Some mornings, I arrived at my job in the city with paint on my hands or dust on my shoes. My coworkers never asked why. They assumed I was clumsy or careless. They never imagined I was building something that would change my life. 3 years passed before the warehouse was ready. On the opening day, people walked through the halls taking photos, admiring the tall windows, smelling the fresh paint and coffee. A national business magazine wrote a long feature about the transformation, and when I saw the headline, I felt the world tilt. It said I was a visionary. It said I had revived a forgotten district. It said my name. That same evening, sitting in my simple apartment with the city lights glowing through the window, my phone buzzed with messages. Private numbers. Unknown contacts. And then the long, silent family group chat lit up. Family dinner. Sunday at 6. Important discussion. My father wrote. No congratulations. No warmth. Only expectation. I stared at my screen, feeling the old ache rise and fade again. Then, I typed one word.
Okay.
I arrived in Cleveland on a clear Sunday afternoon, one of those days when the sky looks polished and the sun hits the river like a blade of light. As the plane dipped toward the runway, I caught a glimpse of my warehouse in the distance. The new roof looked strong and steady, nothing like the sagging structure I had first walked into years before. Seeing it from above felt surreal. That place had once been a dream held together with tape and hope. Now it was a landmark, a statement, a marker of a life I had built in silence. At the airport, I picked up a modest black sedan from the rental counter. I could have chosen something bold or shiny, something that would have matched the numbers in my bank account, but that felt wrong. I was not coming back home to impress anyone. I was coming back to face something old that had finally slipped into my present. The drive to my parents' new home took me past the streets I knew too well, the places where I had waited for buses, the stores where I once bought used notebooks, and the corners where I learned to walk quickly and quietly. My parents had left our old brick house years ago and moved into a newer place in a quiet suburb. The house had a manicured lawn, tall white pillars, and a wide driveway that held 3 cars easily. When I parked at the edge of the driveway, I saw Daniel's silver SUV and Chloe's little blue car lined up neatly, like a display of how well their lives were going. I sat for a moment with my hands still on the steering wheel, watching the shadows move in the front window. The people inside had once forgotten my graduation day. Now they were waiting for me as if I were the center of some long-awaited plan. When I finally rang the doorbell, the chime echoed through the house. My mother opened the door with a bright smile that felt practiced. The kind of smile you offer when guests arrive, not when your daughter comes home. There she is, she said in a high voice. Our big star. She pulled me into a hug that felt more like a quick squeeze for a photo than real affection. Her perfume was strong and familiar, the same smell that floated through our old kitchen during mornings when I tied my shoes on the floor, and she rushed around without looking at me. Inside, the dining room looked strangely formal. The table was covered with a cream cloth, plates polished, and cutlery glowing under the light. My father stood at the head of the table, wearing a suit that looked a little tight across his stomach. He was never the suit type, so the choice felt intentional, like he was preparing for a negotiation. Daniel sat to his right, tie loose, hair perfect, phone sitting beside his plate, like a loyal pet. Chloe sat on the left, twisting the bracelet on her wrist, offering me a small, nervous smile. My father made a sweeping gesture. "Look at you," he said. "Miss Big Developer. We have been following the news." I took a seat at the far end of the long table. The air felt thick, not with warmth, but with expectation. This was not a family dinner. This was a meeting. "So," I said. "You said this was important." My father let out a slow breath, glanced at my mother, and she gave a tiny nod, the way actors might signal each other before saying their lines. "We are proud of you," he began, with a tone that did not match the words. "What you did with that riverfront warehouse is remarkable. The offices, the shops, the attention you brought to the city. You must be doing very well." Daniel jumped in. "You must be making serious money. And the investors backing you, they must trust you a lot." Chloe looked at me, but did not speak. My mother folded her hands, leaning forward slightly. "We thought, since you're doing so well, this could be the right moment to finally work together. As a family." And there it was. The reason they had finally remembered my number. I sat back and listened as my father pulled out a folder and spread papers across the table. Maps of the riverfront. Images of hotels and apartment complexes. Charts with projected numbers. Their excitement filled the room, rising and falling like a rehearsed sales pitch. "There's a fund from Europe," my father said, tapping the papers. "They want to develop the East Riverfront completely. Hotels, offices, shops. A major project. They want local partners, people who already have roots in the district. And you being involved would be perfect." He pointed to a map with 3 highlighted pieces of land. "These 2 lots are already in our control," he said proudly. "I helped Daniel and Chloe invest in them. But the 3rd one is the problem. A small holding company owns it. Harborline Properties." At the sound of that name, something inside me went still. "They are being impossible," he continued. "They know that without that strip in the middle, nothing connects. The whole project collapses. They want too much control. It is unreasonable." My mother leaned closer. "We want you to speak to them. Use your name. Use your connections. If they see you, someone with influence, they will cooperate. And then we can all share in this. Together." Daniel grinned. "Imagine it. Family brings new life to the riverfront. That headline alone could do wonders." I looked down at the map. The middle strip was marked in a darker color. A narrow rectangle that looked unimportant unless you understood how city planning worked. Unless you understood how everything had to connect in one straight line for permits to go through. Unless you had walked on that ground, touched the cracked brick, reviewed every deed tied to its history. Unless you owned it. Harborline Properties was my creation. My money. My work. My risk. My future. I lifted my eyes and met my father's hopeful look. A slow, calm breath filled my lungs. "I think," I said softly, "you may have called the wrong owner to dinner." And just like that, the air changed. The room froze around me. They had no idea that the land they needed, the one piece they could not move without, belonged to the daughter they once forgot in a row of 8 empty chairs. I watched their faces, the confusion settling in like a quiet storm. For the first time in my life, I was not the invisible one at the table. I was the one holding the center of their empire. The moment I said the words, the room seemed to freeze. My father's eyes narrowed with confusion, like he was trying to decide whether he had heard me correctly. My mother sat perfectly still, her hands still folded on the table, but her smile had disappeared. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight. Chloe looked at me with a quiet awareness that made her seem older than she was. My father finally asked, "What do you mean?" I reached down, picked up one of the glossy sheets, and placed my finger on the strip of land they so desperately needed. The map showed 3 lots, 2 outlined in blue, 1 in dark red. "This one," I said. "The strip you said is causing problems. Harborline Properties. You said they were stalling." asking for too much control. My mother nodded quickly. Yes. They're holding the entire project hostage. It is greedy and short-sighted. Daniel let out a frustrated laugh. They want a bigger share than anyone deserves. It is ridiculous. Chloe stayed quiet. Her eyes were soft, but sharp. Somewhere inside her, a puzzle piece had already clicked into place. I laid the paper down gently. For a long second, I let myself remember the girl I used to be. The girl who kept quiet when she should have spoken. The girl who stayed small so others could stay comfortable. The girl who watched 8 chairs sit empty on her graduation day and pretended it did not hurt. But that girl did not follow me into adulthood. I am Harborline, I said. The silence that followed was not loud. It was heavy. It moved across the table like a storm no one had prepared for. My father blinked. Once, twice. What are you talking about? I own Harborline Properties, I said, my voice steady. I founded it. I bought the warehouse. I rebuilt it. I bought this land too. Every building, every contract, every decision you have talked about tonight came from me. My mother let out a sharp exhale. You cannot be serious. You can look up the records, I replied. You probably already did. You just never thought to connect the company to the daughter you ignored every time I did something worth noticing. Daniel leaned forward, face red. Why would you do that? Why would you block your own family from an opportunity like this? Because you are not looking for a partner, I said. You are looking for someone to use. That is all I ever was to you. The helper. The reliable one. The background character. My father stiffened. We are offering you a seat at the table. A chance to be part of something huge. This is not using you. This is family. I looked at the table. The neat plates. The carefully folded napkins. The maps spread across the polished wood. It was a display, not an invitation. You are late, I said quietly. I already built something huge. And I built it without any of you. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We raised you. We gave you everything we could. I felt a familiar ache move through my chest. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just exhaustion. Years of carrying invisible weight had settled into something heavy but calm. You gave me chores, I said in my mind, though I kept those words to myself. Saying them out loud would not change anything. My father pushed the papers toward me. What do you want then? A bigger share? A buyout? Tell us the number. We are talking about millions. Life-changing money. I know exactly how much this land is worth, I said. I know the value down to the last dollar. That is why I bought it. Not to give it away to people who only show up when they want something. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. You cannot hold us hostage. That is cruel. I looked him in the eyes, and the room went still again. Daniel, I said softly, do you remember where you were on my graduation day? He opened his mouth, then shut it. His eyes flickered. He remembered. I remember, I continued. You were posting photos from a weekend trip, writing about how proud you were of yourself. You never asked me how my day went. You never even asked if I needed a ride home. He looked down at the table. That is not cruelty, I said. That is indifference. You all lived your lives as if mine was just background noise. And now that I have something you need, suddenly my life matters. Chloe's voice finally broke through. So what happens now? I turned to her. She was the one person at that table who had not tried to twist the conversation into a demand. Now, I said gently, I keep my land. I develop it in my own way, with partners who respect me, or alone if I choose. What I will not do is erase myself again to fit into the version of family you want. My mother wiped her cheeks. So, you are walking away from us? After everything? I felt it again, that steady, grounded strength that had carried me through years of silence, late-night research, and lonely decisions. I am not walking away from family, I said. I am walking away from a pattern. One that has hurt me for years. My father's voice rose. You will regret this. Opportunities like this do not come twice. I used to think the same thing about your approval, I said. I spent years chasing it, but I do not need it anymore. Not for my work. Not for my future. Not for the person I am. I stood up. My chair scraped softly, but even that sound felt like a declaration. I did not come to join your project, I said. I came to end the part of my life where I made myself small for your comfort. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, placing it in front of Chloe. This is for you, I said. A scholarship fund. It has nothing to do with this deal. Use it for school or travel or finding your own path. No expectations. No repayment. No strings. Her eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that for me? Because I know what it feels like to be told your future is limited, I said. And I will not pass that on. I looked at my father, my mother, and my brother one last time. Their expressions were a mix of anger, confusion, and something else I could not quite name. Maybe it was the beginning of understanding. Or maybe it was just shock. It did not matter. I walked to the door and stepped outside into the evening air. The sky was streaked with gold and fading pink. The streetlights flickered on one by one. The world felt bigger than it ever had when I lived under their roof. Back then, I thought freedom would come when my family finally saw me. But standing in that driveway, keys warm in my hand, I understood the truth. Freedom came the moment I stopped asking to be seen. As I drove away, their house grew small in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed, but I did not look at it. The road stretched open in front of me, wide and full of directions I could choose for myself. For the first time in my life, I was not running from anyone or trying to win anything. I was finally moving toward myself. And that, more than any land or deal or fortune, was the real power I had earned.